What if the most important part of your favorite game is something you have never actually seen? Not the graphics, not the story, not even the music. Something invisible, something your brain processes before you are even aware of it. And once I explain what it is, you're going to start noticing it in every single game you play. You will not be able to stop. We are talking about game feel, also called game juice, also called tactical feedback, also called by some developers the thing that separates a game people finish from a game people abandon after 20 minutes. Fair warning, this video might ruin games for you, the good ones and the bad ones, in every different way. Close your eyes for a second. Actually, do not do that, you're watching a video. But imagine for a moment the last time you played a game that felt truly great. Not looked great, felt great. Maybe it was Celeste, where every jump felt like it landed exactly where your brain said it would. Maybe it was Hollow Knight, where hitting an enemy sent a tiny shockwave through your controller. Maybe it was something much older, a Super Mario game, where jumping on a Goomba had that perfect little bounce, that little squish. Now think about the last time you played the game that felt wrong. Maybe the character moved a half second after you pressed the button. Maybe the hits felt like you were swinging a pool noodle. Maybe you died and genuinely could not tell if it was your fault or the game's fault. That gap between those two experiences is not about graphics. It is not about story. It is entirely about what developers call game feel. Game feel is the sum of everything that happens between the moment you press a button and the moment something meaningful appears on screen. The speed of that response, the animation that plays, the tiny sound effect, the small shake of the camera, the way the character's body reacts. All of it together, in the space of a few milliseconds, creates a sensation. And that sensation tells your brain whether this game is worth trusting. Your brain makes that judgment faster than conscious thought, which is why you can pick up a bad feeling game and know something is off before you can even explain what. Let me introduce you to the concept that ruins more games than bad writing, bad graphics, and bad music combined. It is called input latency, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Input latency is the delay between when you press a button and when the game responds. Measured in milliseconds, invisible to the eye, completely felt by the brain. Studies in human-computer interaction have shown that humans begin to perceive delay at around 100 milliseconds, which is 1/10 of a second. At that point, things start to feel slightly sluggish. At 200 milliseconds, the connection between your input and the result on the screen starts to feel unreliable. And when input feels unreliable, your brain stops trusting the game. Here is why this matters for game design. When you die in a game with tight, precise input, your first instinct is to think, that was my fault. I jumped too early. I mistimed the attack. And that feeling, oddly, makes you want to try again. Because if it was your fault, you can fix it. You have control. But when you die in a game with mushy, delayed input, your first instinct is, was that the game? Did the button not register? And the moment you start blaming the game instead of yourself, you are mentally halfway out of the door. This is not a theory. This is why games like Celeste and Super Meat Boy, games that are brutally difficult, still have enormous completion rates compared to games that are much easier but feel imprecise. The difficulty is not the problem. The feeling of fairness is everything. Let me show you something strange. Go back and play Super Mario Bros. From 1985, or Mega Man 2, or Sonic the Hedgehog. These games are 40 years old and they still feel incredible. Then go play some of the early 3D games from the late 90s and early 2000s. Some of them aged beautifully. and some of them feel like trying to control a bar of soap on a wet floor. Why does a 40-year-old 2D platformer still feel competitive? Why some games from 15 years ago already feel ancient? The answer is mechanical consistency. 2D pixel art games operate on extremely simple rules. The character moves at a fixed speed. The jump arc is the same every single time. The hitboxes are clean rectangles. There is very little space for ambiguity. And because there is no ambiguity, your brain learns the rules quickly and starts to trust them completely. Early 3D games introduced a whole new layer of complexity. Cameras that moved on their own, physics that behaved differently depending on the surface, hitboxes that did not quite match the character model. Suddenly, the rules were blurry. And blurry rules feel bad, even when everything else looks impressive. This is also why there is a whole generation of indie developers today who are deliberately choosing pixel art and 2D mechanics. Not because they cannot make 3D, but because the constraints of 2D force mechanical clarity. And mechanical clarity feels good. Here is one of my favorite terms in all of game design: game juice. Game juice is the collection of small effects that make actions feel satisfying without changing what actually happens mechanically. A screen shake when an explosion goes off. A tiny freeze frame, called hitstop, when your sword connects with an enemy. A sound effect with a satisfying crunch. Particles that fly out when you collect a coin. The way a character's sprite squashes slightly when it lands. None of these things change the rules of the game, but all of them communicate information to your brain. They say, that hit landed, that jump connected, that enemy took damage. You did the thing correctly. Without game juice, games feel silent and cold. With too much of it, games feel chaotic and unreadable. The best developers find the exact right amount. And when they do, you feel it in your hands. A brilliant example of this is the hit-stop mechanic, used incredibly well in Hollow Knight and Hades. When you hit an enemy, the game freezes for just a few frames. We're talking maybe 3 to 6 frames at 60 frames per second, which is less than a tenth of a second. You barely notice it consciously, but your brain reads it as an impact, weight, consequence. It makes every hit feel like it means something. Compare that to a game where hits have no hit stop. The animation plays, the health bar goes down, but the action feels like you are hitting air. Same mechanics, completely different feelings. So, based on this research, flow is the state of complete absorption in an activity. Time disappears. Self-consciousness disappears. You are just doing the thing, and the thing feels effortless even when it is objectively hard. The conditions for flow are specific. The challenge must match your skill level. Not too easy, not impossible. Feedback must be immediate and clear. And crucially, there must be a sense of control. You must feel that your actions have direct and predictable consequences. That last condition is entirely about game feel. Tight input, responsive controls, and clear feedback are the mechanical foundations of flow. Without them, flow cannot happen. The brain keeps getting interrupted by moments of uncertainty, moments where the game did something unexpected, moments where you pressed a button and nothing happened. And each interruption pulls you out of the state. This is why precision controls are not just a nice feature. They are the architecture of engagement. They are what keeps players in the game, literally and psychologically, for hours at a time. And here is the interesting part. You do not need expensive technology to create that architecture. Some of the best flow-inducing games ever made run on extremely simple technical foundations. Shovel Knight was made by a handful of developers deliberately studying what made the NES games feel good. Dead Cells spent years in early access, and a significant part of that time was purely refining how the combat felt, not adding new content, just making the existing actions feel better and better. Something interesting has been happening in game development over the last decade. A growing number of developers, many of them indie, have been deliberately moving away from the chase for photorealism and toward what some people are calling the neo-retro movement. These are games that embrace pixel art, hand-drawn animation, or deliberately simple visuals, not because of budget limitations, but as a design philosophy. The argument is simple. If you're not spending your resources on high-fidelity graphics, you can spend them on what actually makes games feel good. Games like Celeste, Shovel Knight, Cuphead, Dead Cells, Katana Zero, and more recently Cassette Beasts and Brotato have all built enormous audiences not by looking like the most advanced games available, but by feeling like the most refined. Actually, it still takes a lot of years to make those kind of games. I'm not saying that they have bad graphics. Now, with all that said, let me bring this all together with a question I find genuinely fascinating. Why do some games get described as addictive and others, sometimes objectively more impressive games, get abandoned after a weekend? The standard answers are story, progression systems, social features, and those matter. But underneath all of them is something more fundamental. It is the moment-to-moment sensation of playing, the feel of every individual action. If pressing a button feels good, you want to press it again. If jumping feels satisfying, you want to keep jumping. If hitting an enemy produces the right crunch and the right screen shake and the right hit stop, you want to keep fighting. The loop does not even need to be that complex. The sensation carries it. This is what the best indie games have understood, and what some of the most expensive games in the world have somehow missed. A $200 million game with a dozen systems and 100 hours of content can still feel hollow if the basic act of moving around inside it does not feel right. And a small game made by one person in a free engine over the course of a year can be completely impossible to put down if every single input feels like it was designed with care. That invisible architecture, the one you cannot see but feel in your hands every second you are playing, is the whole thing. Everything else is built on top of it. The best indie games have been proving this for years. All of them feel extraordinary to play, and that feeling is why people are still talking about them years after release, while technically superior games have been forgotten. Now I want to know, what game has the best game feel you have ever experienced? Drop it in the comments. I am genuinely curious, and I want to see if we all agree on the same ones or if the answers are more surprising than I expect. If this video made you think about games differently, a like helps more than you know. And if you want more content about game design, development, and the invisible things that make games work, subscribing means you will not miss what is coming next. Let me know what you think in the comments. And like always, thanks for watching.